So I don't know about all of you, but there are a couple of verses or lines in that reading that kind of jump out to me. And they jump out to me and they transport me back to a time when I was in middle school in rural Indiana. It's where I grew up. Most of my young childhood was out there in the farmlands in between the small towns. And the first line that jumps out to me is one of the things Jesus says to Nicodemus near the beginning of this. In our translation, it says, "You must be born from above." But maybe some of you know the older translation, "You must be born again." I hear those words and I'm immediately transported back into my 7th grade class on one particular day when a couple of my classmates decided they needed to go around and ask everyone in our school if they were born again, if they were a born-again Christian. And I still remember the awkwardness that kind of made me feel. I grew up going to church my whole life, but I didn't really know what to say to them. I told them, well, I go to church, I guess. That's a thing. But I watched that whole thing unfold, and I watched the awkwardness on many of my friends' faces as they were asked that question. And it occurred to me even then that it seemed like these friends of mine, these colleagues, these classmates, they were asking, trying to give an answer to a question that nobody was really asking. I was glad that the church I was from didn't encourage me to go and do something like that as well. The second line in this reading that sticks out to me comes kind of closer to the end, and maybe you've heard it before too. It's John 3:16. "For God so loved the world, he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish, but have eternal life." And if you grew up out in the country, you probably saw some billboards or some signs with that on it, usually with a few more thys and thous thrown in, or maybe even more commonly, just the title, John 3:16. Up on a big billboard or on a homemade sign out at the end of someone's door. They didn't even need to say what it was. They just assumed everybody knew. And while those John 3:16 signs didn't bother me in quite the same way as my classmates asking me if I was born again, it kind of felt in like a similar vein, that people are trying to give an answer to a question that maybe nobody was asking. Well, my middle school memories aren't all about, Jesus and theology and things. And so the other thing I think about when I go back to my 6th and 7th grade years was the first time that we were allowed in school to get on the internet. If you know me and my excitement about technology, you can tell this is a very formative time in my life. I had the full access to high-speed internet, no dial-up. It was like a fast school-type connection. And so we'd have computer class every couple of days or so, and I would rush through whatever assignment we were given, all the typing things, as quickly as I possibly could, because I wanted to get to the real good stuff, free time. When you got done with your assignment, you had free time, and you could go anywhere on the internet that the school filter didn't shut down for you. And a lot of my friends, they would rush off, and they would find ways to play, the little flash games and the little things that you can find online. But I would always go to the same place. I would rush off to my gaming forums and message boards because what I was looking for were walkthroughs and tutorials for video games. You see, that Christmas, I got my very first game console, a brand new PlayStation 2. I'd never had one before, and I loved it, but I was really bad at it. For some reason, I didn't quite have the coordination yet. I couldn't pass all the levels. Even on easy mode, I would get stuck again and again. I'd get so frustrated. I'd practically be throwing the controller, but I didn't because I knew the controller was expensive. But what I found when I got access to the internet at school was that I could search and figure out how to beat some of these levels, how to get past the boss that I'd been stuck on for weeks and weeks. I could even find cheat codes that would really let me change the game. And so I would get on these forums and I'd be scrolling through as fast as I could. I'd be like writing down notes because they didn't let us print yet. I'd be writing down my own hand-drawn notes of like maps and different things I wanted to try and wanted to do. And I remember very vividly one day, my computer teacher kind of coming up behind me and seeing me like read really excitingly and taking notes. And she got kind of excited. And she's like, wow, Ben, what are you doing? What are you so excited about? Are you looking at? And I was thrilled. I'm like, let me show you how amazing this is. This is the map of where I've got to go. And the secret package is right over here. And as I'm describing all of this, I kind of watched the light kind of leave her eyes a little bit. And all of a sudden, she just kind of like, well, very interesting. And then she moved on to maybe a more promising student doing something else somewhere down the hall. But it occurs to me now that moment where I was so excited about what I had found, but that nobody else really cared, isn't all that different than my friends, my classmates, who were asking everyone if they'd been born again. You see, for these classmates and for so many others, there's answers here in this Bible text. You must be born again. God so loved the world, he gave his son. For so many people, those words answer a question that they'd been struggling with and working on and asking and asking. And when you find an answer to a question you've been struggling with, you want to share it with the world. But sometimes, I think maybe most of the time, the power comes not from the answers, but from the questions. I wasn't thrilled with the answers I found online because they were beautifully written in wonderful pieces of literature. I was thrilled because they answered a question that I had been having for weeks and something I'd been struggling with and working on. I think for so many of us, we have those kinds of questions, and to try and pull out answers can be tricky. In this story, it's Nicodemus's questions that give us the answers. You must be born again. Or John 3:16, God so loved the world that he gave his son. Nicodemus was struggling with who Jesus was. It kept him up at night. He couldn't sleep, and so he went to Jesus with the things he'd been wrestling with, and Jesus gives him more questions and maybe even a few words that Nicodemus could use as an answer. Now, we don't get to see what happens to Nicodemus immediately after this story. He kind of disappears for a while, but he does come back. He shows up again near the end of the gospel. He speaks out in favor of Jesus at his trial. And then again, after Jesus' death, Nicodemus is there with another man, Joseph of Arimathea, who arranged for Jesus' body to be taken down and to be buried. Nicodemus' life was changed by the conversation he had with Jesus. Maybe not exactly by the answers, but definitely by the questions that he was asking. Nicodemus, maybe after that, was the first one to go around to his neighbors and ask all of them if they were born again and watch all of them roll their eyes. Might have been the very first person to put a John 3:16 sign in his yard. Nicodemus, his life was changed. Not necessarily because the answer was so perfect, although Jesus does give pretty good answers from time to time, but because of those questions. Because of those questions that kept Nicodemus up at night, that spurred him to go and to find Jesus, to have this conversation, and to be changed. And that's what I think God calls us to do. Not to jump right away to the answers or to someone else's answer and assume we can use that too, but to sit with our questions. The questions that we have about God, about who we are, about what we're called to do with our lives, about our families, about what might happen next. Those questions can be uncomfortable. Those questions can keep us up at night. But it's in the wrestling with the questions that God goes to work, maybe even before we know it, before we're aware of it. God goes to work in our questioning and in our wondering. And again, God shows up with words and places we never expected and changes our lives. I want to challenge all of you this week to try and sit with some of those questions. And not to jump right to an answer, but really just to sit with the questions that are on your heart. The ones that may be hard to say. The ones that matter to you. Sit with those questions and see where God is moving around them. I want to give you just one more thing, one more example, one more reminder that maybe the answer isn't the point, but the question might matter just a little bit more. It comes from one of my favorite movies/books, and I think you might like it too, and we'll take a look at that.
Many millions of years ago, a race of hyper-intelligent, pan-dimensional beings got so fed up with the constant bickering about the meaning of life that they commissioned two of their brightest and best to design and build a stupendous supercomputer to calculate the answer to life, the universe, and everything.
Oh, Deep Thought, we want you to tell us the answer.
The answer to what?
The answer to life, the universe, everything. We'd really like an answer. Something simple.
I have to think about that. Return to this place in exactly 7.5 million years.
Deep Thought, do you have
An answer for you? Yes, but you're not going to like it.
It doesn't matter, we must know it.
All right. The answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything is 42.
42?
Yes, I thought it over quite thoroughly. It is, it's 42. It would have been simpler, of course, to have known what the actual question was.
But it was the question. The ultimate question. Of everything.
That's not a question. Only when you know the question will you know what the answer means.
Give us the ultimate question then.
I can't. But there is one who can. A computer that will calculate the ultimate question. A computer of such infinite complexity that life itself will form part of its operational matrix. And you yourselves shall take on new, more primitive forms and go down into the computer to navigate its 10 million year program. I shall design this computer for you, and it shall be called...
Drama. There you go. So no matter what questions are on your mind, whether it's the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything, or something more meaningful to you, I hope that you'll sit with that question, not try to rush to an answer, but to see that God is at work in all your journeying, in all your wondering, and most especially in all of our questioning. Amen.